One. Well, hey, Dave Molenda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. As I like to do, I start with a question, and this one, super easy like they normally are up front, but then as you start to dig a little deeper, it all of a sudden takes on a whole different meaning. And like the question today is, how often do you hit your revenue targets? And I thought about that and I'm like, well, is that a monthly target? Is that a weekly target? Is that a yearly target? And, I'm like, man, this is a really great question. And then I find somebody that's a fractional CRO, and we'll figure out what that is in a minute. But I'm honored to be hanging out with Ted Fluck. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, Dave. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. You're a founder of Dynamic Sales Teams. So tell us, what is Dynamic Sales Teams and what's going on over there today?
Yeah, well, after a career of selling in multiple industries, I had really looked back and realized that I had been building sales teams in both the financial services industries and financial services, insurances, all sorts of products there. Moved into healthcare work and then moved into the education and tech sectors, and really found that throughout my career I had been starting sales teams usually from scratch, and
Yeah,
sometimes in unfortunate situations where you had to grow those sales teams, which sometimes you had to just do a little bit of dismantling, as I say, a little bit of deconstruction before you can reconstruct.
sure.
And we're just really growing highly successful sales and marketing teams. So I decided to kind of take that as on the road, so to speak, and do that independently. And it's been going very, very well. And I really do enjoy building those dynamic sales teams and working with organizations to help achieve their revenue goals, as you said, because a lot of those organizations we work with every single day are not making their revenue targets, and they need help doing it. And sometimes that outside perspective is the best thing that we can bring to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Isn't that funny, Ted, that most people they don't, I mean, they product train like crazy, right? They
Sure.
train on the product, they train on spreadsheets, the offices train. I mean, they
Yeah.
train on all this stuff. And I've noticed the same thing probably, and I just wanted your opinion. Are you noticing that the salespeople kind of have to fend for themselves in the training world where they're just kind of left off on their own?
Yeah, I do 110%. And I think it's a bit of a pendulum shift where so much information is readily available to the consumer, to the client, the
Yeah,
potential client these days. And they're acquiring so much data and information about competitors and about your own products on their own. I think we've hyper focused on those small details and nuances of what the product is. And to the detriment of many organizations, we've failed to establish that human connection, which really is the buying connection. And we've looked too much into the very specific nuanced details of what the product is, what the product is, what the product is. And we
yeah,
stopped listening to what the problem the customer has or the potential
sure.
client has, and how
Right.
it could be a solution-based sale for that. So I do see that all the time. And it's
Yeah,
not wrong. I mean, for companies to train on product, we have to do that, right? I mean, that's very important. But you
yep.
can't. I mean, the most important thing is the establishment of that rapport with the sales team and how they're developing those relationships, and we can't turn a blind eye to that.
Yeah. Well, and we were laughing before we jumped on that, you and I have been in sales our whole life, and you
Yeah.
build these companies and everyone loves the salesperson until they get into a disagreement with marketing. Marketing thinks one thing, sales thinks another, right? Or
Yeah.
operations and sales, they always tend to be at odds with each other. Um, I think we're always, salespeople are just prejudiced that, hey, sales is the most important because without it, obviously, none of the other departments are really going to have anything to
Yeah.
do. Do you find in your travels and in your trainings, do you find people that still kind of buck that sales is not highlighted in a company or it's not as important? We shouldn't focus on this. We should focus on, other parts. Do you still see that today?
I do see it, and I particularly see it with small businesses and small business owners who have developed their own products and really brought something to market that they're extremely passionate about. And
Right.
unfortunately, I think sometimes we have this black or white like perspective of sales. We'll upset our customer. We don't give customer service if we push sales, or if we
Yeah.
become a sales focused organization, we'll lose that product expertise,
Yeah.
or we'll lose those relationships. Where, I mean, nothing could be further from the truth if you're hiring the right people, and if you
Sure.
really have identified your core company culture and understand who you're hiring and bring on the team and bring them on in the right way and train them, Dave, in the right fashion for your product and
Right.
for your service. And it's not to be said that that ultra alpha salesperson who can really be, quote unquote, aggressive and
Yeah.
just kind of churn through client lists. There are organizations that only want that person. And frankly, that type of person would only thrive there. There are other
Right.
organizations which are much more, say, client centered, client focused, and have a much longer sales cycle. If they identify that
Yeah.
that's their culture, they have to hire the right people for that. So they have the right balance of culture and progression of growth for sure. But
Yeah.
it's mostly small business owners, I
Sure.
believe,
Sure.
that still have that disconnect a little bit. And that's okay. Most of them aren't salespeople by nature, and it can become a little bit, they may be afraid of having some of those stereotypes brought into their team and into their organization. And let's face it, Dave, we're not typically the easiest people to manage or control.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Don't control any. I mean, control and salespeople, that's like oil and water, right? Those are two
Yeah.
kind of opposites. But you said something at the beginning, Ted, that I want to kind of go back to because I don't want to
Yeah.
miss that about the deconstruct and the reconstruct. Because I'm sure
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
people listening right now that are still in that spot. I run into people a lot that are like, hey, my sales team's not the best, but I have a team. I'd
Yeah.
rather have somebody in the seat than not, right? So how do you
Right.
like help
Absolutely.
somebody with that deconstruct mentality? Because I run into people, like I said, all the time that, hey, I'm happy I have a team. And now here
Yeah.
you come along and Ted says, hey, maybe you have to deconstruct this. Do you get some resistance at that spot when you talk about deconstructing first?
Yes, for sure. I think some people, I say this the right way. I think everybody's aware that they're not achieving their goals, and they know that it's usually a people problem,
Yeah, yeah.
but very few people want to kind of go through that type of change. I mean, that's a difficult organizational change and cultural change, and nobody wants to let people go. Nobody wants to, well, few people want to push people harder than they have been, perhaps for a few years, and are really afraid of the results. But this actually goes back to when I was a captain in the Army. When I got out of college, it was my first job as a captain in the Army, and our motto was constructo et destructo, so construction and destruction. I was a combat
Sure.
engineer, so that's resonated with me for years, and it kind of has just stuck with me, and it's been the core of what I do. So a lot of the times, what we want to do when we're going into an organization that knows they're not meeting their revenue targets, perhaps they've had some salespeople, they've tried some training, they just don't seem to be getting the results that they need, and maybe they don't have the right salespeople. But the most important thing to do in that stage is really have an excellent understanding of what the fortitude is of the C-level suite, of the C-suite, the owner, whoever it may be that you're dealing with,
Hmm.
or maybe it's the director of sales or the VP of sales. And are they really ready to go through institutional change? And if they are, you need to have a map. You need to develop a strategy. You need to really identify what are your 18-month to 3-year goals, and then what are your annual and quarterly goals to get there. And a lot of times, as bad as it may sound, you can kind of hire people out. And what I mean by that is, when you start to hire new talent that comes in, that you take your real time, you do excellent profiling with them, you really do a good job going through the resumes and establishing like what type of companies they've worked for before, and you really have identified again that cultural fit for your new
Yeah.
sales teams. As those new people come in, a lot of times people will start to find that, hey, maybe this isn't the right organization for me anymore. And how I mean by that is that if they're not ready to adjust and they aren't willing to adjust or change, then that's okay. We can lead them to success elsewhere, and we can help them through
Sure.
that process. But we owe it to the salespeople who are currently in the team through that deconstruction phase, as I say, to give them as much support, training, clear communication. And we owe it to them to really say what those specific objectives are and say, what can I do as a sales leader to provide you the support and provide you the materials or the knowledge or maybe the resources within their market that they need to achieve those goals. And if it's just not going to be a fit, then that's okay. And then we just continue to evolve through a process, but really mapping that out and identifying what you believe will be the potential targets over the next quarters and the next year are really important to go through in that deconstruction phase. And then once I have found when you bring on that new talent, that average sale, let's say that average sale has been, $10,000 for the past 5 years, we've been doing $10,000 a sale. What you're going to find is that next person comes in, it's going to make it 12,500. And then that
Sure,
becomes a new bar and a new standard. And
sure.
then all of a sudden you're going to hire a new group coming in and it's going to be 15. And what you'll do is you'll just kind of continuously raise that bar. And that's going to take a time. That's going to be an evolution versus a revolution, but it's really something that's systematic and planned and mapped out.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's easy. I just want to acknowledge for the people listening, it's easy for us to sit here and tell you to deconstruct, right? So I
Yeah.
get it, you know, Ted gets it that it's easy to say it. It's a whole different thing to do it. But I think that's why
Mhm.
there are people like Ted around, because if you see that you need to do it, but you don't know how, that's again,
Yeah.
why somebody like Ted's around. I also wanted to say thank you so much for your service to our country. So that's fantastic. I never had the privilege of having to serve or wanting to serve. So, but thank you for doing that. You
Well,
mentioned a
thank you,
word
Dave.
that I really want to kind of circle back to again, but you talked about profiling. And
Yeah.
what I think is really interesting is today in today's world, and again, I try to simplify things as much as I can. I think about like two big buckets in salespeople. I mean, we've all
Mhm.
heard hunter and farmer, right? And
Sure.
so I
Sure.
feel like there's the people that are out looking for sales, and then there are people that are kind of waiting, more of a customer service, um, inside sales type of role. And I think it's unique because if I understand your profiling word, you can use some science. I know we use DISC a lot to be able to
Excellent.
use to determine if they can sell or not. So when
Hmm.
you think of profiling, Ted, what do you mean with that word on how to figure out the quality of a sales professional?
Yeah, no, love it. And I love disc. I mean, that was actually the first, I mean, we're not going to say the year I took my first disc, but it's been a while. Let's just say that. And the irony is as a young
2019.
salesperson, sure, sure. As a young salesperson coming in, when I was first did the disc profile, for example,
Yeah, yeah,
my scores were boom right here. It's like, everybody's like, you have to be a salesperson, Ted. This is what you're wired to do, right? This is where
sure.
you're going to flourish. And they
Yep,
were right. I mean, I've had a wonderful run for, 20 plus years, doing that. And the funny thing is, 10 years later, took the profile, still the same. 20 years
yep,
later, took the profile,
yep.
still the same. So what I tell people is when it comes that people are hesitant and they want to give pushback and all that. And in fact, as you know, and with your experiences, we could profile the people that are going to give you the profile pushback.
Yep.
And we
Right.
would know
Yeah.
right
Your
away from
profile
that, from
says
that,
you're
from
about to
those
do
results.
this, right? Exactly.
Exactly, exactly. But what that really means is that hiring is tough, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it these days. You are going to get hundreds of resumes when you post a job online, or you're
Right.
using Indeed, or you're using one of those brands, or you're using LinkedIn, whatever it may be. And there's going to be so much noise as far as the hiring process goes. So if you don't have specific referrals from specific trusted people who are in the industry, being able to work through a profiling process where we're looking at two things, which I think are the most quantitative things, and neither one of them are really used as much as they should be. One is some type of personality or traits profile. I
Mhm.
like the disc. You're using
Yep.
the disc. I think that's fantastic. And there are others out there which can give you different looks and different perspectives too.
Right.
Doesn't mean they're wrong. They're just looking for different things. And then also, one of the things that people do not do anymore, and I think people got caught up in some legal compliance around this, is references. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how few organizations actually do reference checks,
Right.
which to me is insane because I can write my resume with AI right now in less than 39 seconds. I mean, it's just, and I can make it look wonderful, right? And you can
Yeah.
put it out there and you can have certain experiences. But really what it comes down to is, are you really looking at and you're really exploring more in depth with the references that people are doing? So you get a profile of how people are wired, and does that balance with who you're looking at and what level of references they have and who they are? And, ask them some tough questions as well,
Right.
because if it's just a friend who they're putting on there and people are like, oh,
Yeah.
they're just going to put on their friends and family. Well, you can do a real quick check on on their resume and find out if it's
Yeah.
if it's a little bit of BS or not, right? So
Yeah. Yep.
anyway, I would always look through those two things, but I really do believe in that type of profiling work before you really get into the interview process. It's just
Right.
not worth the candidate's time, your company's time is all very valuable, and putting in a little bit of extra work by having them actually take a profile, have them sit down for 30 minutes or however long they take. Some of them are abbreviated, some of them are much longer, but
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
also a kind of speed bump to have in front of somebody also, to say, okay, look, I have 100 resumes. Well, only 35 of them are actually going to take this profile. And of that
Right.
35, maybe 5 to 7 are going to be a decent fit that I want to talk to anyway. And you've narrowed down
Right.
your pool just like that. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that,
I could
no,
talk
that's
about this all
fantastic. I love
day.
it. That's exactly, I'm 100% in agreement with that because again, I asked those tough three questions. Can they sell? Well,
Yeah.
if somebody's hard up for a job, they'll say,
Mhm.
like you said, they'll say whatever they want to say in an interview. They'll say whatever they want to
Mhm.
say on their resume. But the interesting thing is neither the resume nor the interview is there a lot of science that's involved. So you bring into this a profile, some kind of assessment, whatever that looks
Mhm.
like. Like for us, we can tell how good an individual is going to be at prospecting. Well, if the job is a highly prospecting job and someone's either never done it before or they're weak at it and they walk in and they're going to tell you, oh, Ted, I can sell ice to Eskimos, right? And
Yeah.
then you hire them because you only have two things, the interview and the resume. And like you said, most
Yeah.
people on the references side, because of
Mhm.
liability, they say, yeah, he's worked here, she's worked here from this time to this time. And that's all that they'll
Yep.
tell you. Can you tell me anything else? Nope, can't tell you a thing. Well, so
Mhm.
that obviously doesn't help. So now you're stuck with, again, purely somebody's word. And I'm not here calling people liars as much as when the more desperate they are to get that job, boy, the more they can do, right? So
Sure. And
then you
Dave, you're going
hire
to
the
take care of your
person.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then you hire the person, and then you find out they can't sell a hot dog to a starving man. And it's like, oh my gosh, right? Here we
Yeah.
go. And now I'm stuck because I'm 6 months in, or nine
Mhm.
months in, or a year in. I have invested all this money in this sales professional. And now what?
Yeah.
Okay, round peg, square hole. Now I got to really start figuring things out because she's supposed to make 25 calls a day. She's making three, or she's
Yeah.
supposed to do X number of networking events a week, or whatever the behavior performance that we're looking at.
Mhm.
So I love that profiling piece. Um, do you see
I'd like
that?
to add, if I add
Go
to that a
ahead.
little
Yeah,
bit real quick,
absolutely. For
Dave, as
sure.
well, if that's okay. Not only,
Yeah.
so the resume and the references will get you so far. What the profiling will really tell you is what's their endurance, right?
Yeah.
Anybody should be able to do something for those first 30 days, 90 days. And just as you
Right.
said, at that 6 month point or that 1 year point, things could start to
Yep.
change, right? And now you're
Yes.
fully
Yep.
vested though. But what you really want to know is, hey, is this person going to thrive selling the way we want them to sell?
Yes.
If it's cold calling or whatever that work is, because you can't get too far away from their core wiring. As I was mentioning, part of the thing, like the profile is like, I am wired X way. Luckily,
Yep.
I found that out early, and I know that this is the type of environment that I really enjoy and I thrive. And it
Yep.
doesn't affect me. If I leaned a little bit more one way or the other in my career preference or what I chose
Yep.
for my career,
Correct. Yeah.
the grind would I wouldn't enjoy it. And you don't want somebody on your in your organization selling your product who's not enjoying the work. So it really does come to
Absolutely.
that endurance and how long you want them to be there. So, and again, I think that's really that problem that profile does solve too. Like a limited duration or time. People can endure and push through anything, but are they going to be consistent and are they going to really last? And that's what those
Yeah.
profiles really find out, because people want salespeople to stick. You want that salesperson to be there for more than 3 to 5 years. They're just getting good.
Right.
you know.
Yeah. It takes
So,
you that long
so
to
I just wanted
pay
to
for
add a
them,
little
right?
bit of that. I'm
You
sorry.
get
I'm sorry.
takes you that
Yeah.
long to pay for them, 3 to 5 years, you know? I mean,
It,
they're not
yeah.
making you money year one, very rarely. And if you think they are, it's probably a blind spot that you have, or
Mhm.
you have a super easy product and all you're doing is just, again, on the street corner selling hot dogs. And not that that's bad,
Yeah.
but I
No.
just think that I like it for when I'm involved in it. I think of it this
Mhm.
way. I think a third of my decision is going to be based on the interview. A third of my decision is going to be based on the resume, and then a third of my decision is going to be made based on an assessment that they use, in this case,
Yeah.
DISC. And
Yeah.
it just gives me so much more, tools to use. I mean, I think of it this way, and then we're going to take a quick break. I think of it that, like, if I buy a rose and I plant it in sand and I only water it once a month, it's not going to live. Just like if I
Yeah.
buy a cactus, right, and put it in dirt and water it every day, that's not going to live. The environment that we put our sales professionals in a lot of times is either going to make or break them. And
Sure.
I want to know exactly what their environment is. I don't know if I should plant this individual in sand or in dirt. So when we come back, Ted, I want to kind of get into like the ROI of your work, and I want to get into some mistakes that you've seen in hiring. So we'll be right back.
Yeah. Right.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again, Ted, for hanging out with us today. I love talking about sales, as do you. So, we could just sit here all day and do it.
It's all good.
Yeah, hopefully everyone's enjoying this. I hope again that you walk away from this time with Ted better than you came into it. And that's really, I think, where I want to go next. Or like, what are some common mistakes that you see in that hiring process? I know we kind of talked about a couple. Just curious if there's
Mhm.
other ones that you see in the hiring process.
I um I think a lot of times when people think that they want the alpha hunter, and I find more and more times that companies aren't built around that. And I like to say this yet. And I think everybody wants to really have that high performing hunter who's out there and just crushing it. And what they may not always be aware of what's going to come along with that. So if you want that personality type, and there is nothing wrong with this personality type, mind you, it is whether or not you can support them, lead them, train them, and whether or not you're prepared for it. If you want the type of person who's going to be extra demanding on your customer service, if you want the type of person who's going to say, I don't care to the product team, make it work for my client, I just signed this contract. And if you
Right?
want the person who's going to like be offering rebates or some wild deals that the chief financial officer may not be prepared to stomach, then
Ted,
maybe
you've
you're
been
not ready
following
for
my
that.
career. Nice job. Thanks, buddy.
They're the lone wolves out there, and
I love
and
it.
look, I mean, there's a lot of different sales methodologies and sales things that are out there. One like the Challenger series that are out there that talks about these independent lone wolves. And look,
Yeah.
if you want to grow your business, that's a great way to go.
Yep.
But it's like with that comes if you're gonna put a wolf in your backyard, you better be ready for some
Yeah.
things, right? So what does
No,
that mean to
absolutely.
you? And so really what I find is that people don't always know what they're asking for as far as that goes. And I think the biggest hiring mistakes that are made are really a lack of plan and a lack of true introspection of what you need and what you're prepared to give to them outside of the product training, like you hit on before earlier in the podcast today. We talk about what type of sales training are they really getting? What type of customer experience do you want to
Yeah.
give to your clients? And you
Right.
have to know that long before you identify what type of salesperson you want to bring on board, and you have to be able to find that in your interviews. And that's, I think, where the another big mistake is. I don't think the interview processes are as thorough as they could be. Not that they need
Sure.
to be long in duration, but you need to ask the right questions. You need to come back. You need to have a methodology to really finding out whether or not their personalities and skill sets are matching the traits and the characteristics and qualities that you want.
Wow, that's great. And I asked the question, or ask the question, if the job could
Mhm.
talk, what would it say? Right? I
That's great.
mean, what
Yeah.
does the
Yeah.
job need right here? If we could literally take a job and turn it into a human being, sit it there and say, what is it that you need? What characteristics do you need?
Mhm.
What traits do you need? That's, I think, a huge help because, like you said, we all want that hunter, right? Until he
Yeah.
brings a bloody carcass in, and everyone's looking
That's
around
right.
going, well,
It's like,
I don't
whoa.
know I don't know what to do with this thing, right?
Yeah.
This isn't how we used to do it. I mean, the first time I hear that's just how we do it around here, I just cringe because it's like,
Yeah.
man, these are tough.
Yeah.
And I think that's an alignment issue again. You can't
Hmm.
turn a hunter into a farmer very easy, and you can't turn a
Hmm.
farmer into a hunter very easy. I mean, they're two very
No.
different skill sets, like you said, and neither one is right or wrong. But I think it's brilliant what you said is to really align your job with that person, because that's
Hmm.
me, right? I love hunting. I've done it my whole life since I've been whatever 18 years old. I'm out hunting, not
Yeah.
physically, but in the sales world. And so if you hired me to sit behind a desk, and I remember one of my jobs early in my career was selling shoes at a mall.
Yeah.
Well, I had to stand there, Ted. So I'm like thinking about this. Christmas was awesome, right? Because it was so
Yeah.
crowded. People were in there. Well, I
Hmm.
tell you what, January and February up here in Milwaukee, where the mall opens
Yeah.
at 10, there weren't
Yeah.
people coming sometimes until 2 in the afternoon. And I couldn't
Yeah.
use a
Yeah.
sandwich board to go out and bring them in. I just had to stand there and wait. And I'm like, man, this is brutal. And
This
that's
is
where I
killing
couldn't
you.
do that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But then you
Yeah.
take that retail person that loves that atmosphere and put them onto a straight commission, type of hunting deal, they're gonna fail miserably as well. So that's awesome. Um,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
just curious from the ROI perspective,
Mhm.
this is where hopefully the entrepreneur listening, their ears perk up, because it's one
Yeah.
thing to say we should train somebody or we do this or that. How does ROI come into play for you guys at Dynamic Sales Teams?
Well, the question can go different ways. Whenever I do a consult with somebody, I actually have a guarantee with them that they will actually 3x my expense within 12 to 18 months, depending on the product or service that we're doing.
Okay.
And that's really important to me. I want them to be able to see an immediate return, to get that money back right away in either a savings or a revenue increase right away.
Sure.
And I guarantee that with my clients for my particular services. And then like ROI on a salesperson, small business, like they might have like one or two people, maybe if
Yeah.
they're just getting
Yep.
going, like, oh, I
Yep.
just can't afford another salesperson, or I only want to go 1099. That way they're only,
Yeah.
we're only paying them what they're bringing in. And you really have to take a look at that investment. I think you made an excellent point that I would always say you should cover all costs and expenses, like all costs and expenses within year one. They should be able to do that within a year of selling for
Yep.
themselves, and you should be able to see within. And you have to be, again, this is an investment. A salesperson is an investment in the organization, and hopefully you have like an annual recurring revenue with your client, and that could be a continued multiple down the line. But I would say within 2 to 3 years, they should be easily 2 to 3x, depending on the product that they're selling. And you can get into software as a service where it's a much different multiple than it is selling a commodity or something along those lines. But it's important to know the product, and it's important to know your own. Again, you got to know what you're doing, right? And people don't think about this, and this is where my background is like, I'm a HubSpot certified RevOps, background here. But when you look at that true revenue, like what is your margin? What products do you really want them pushing and selling, and why? What works
Yeah.
best for the company? What can you pay a higher commission on
Sure.
versus other products? And really aligning that product mix for your sales team and the commission and pay structure around the sales team that way is very important for the health of the organization. So again,
Sure.
I would look at those as kind of things like that investment in that first year. We're hoping to cover costs, and going into year twos and threes, you're looking at a 2 to 3 time multiple for a salesperson. And again, for
Yep.
most people like yourself and myself, we're working with teams and growing organizations. I would suggest for myself, I look at that guarantee, and I would talk to people about what they would expect to have an ROI out of the gates. And again, use that as your benchmark. What people fail to do sometimes is measure it, and we can talk about that as well. I mean, one of my favorite things is talking about quarterly business reviews. And
Yeah.
are you really getting into a review with your sales team? People are like, oh, I don't have time to do that. I just want to go out and sell, and we don't have time for this business stuff. I was like, if you can't take 3 days a quarter to reflect on what you've done and to
Yeah.
reflect on what you're doing and to talk about the support you're going to need in the next quarter and the remainder of the year to achieve your goals, you're never going to achieve them, or
Yeah.
they're too low. So
Yeah.
it's like those quarterly business reviews are an essential part of the lifeblood of the culture of an organization. They have to be hard conversations to the field team, and they have to be
Yep.
hard conversations and hard thinking to the executive leadership team about how they're supporting and what they're providing and how marketing and customer service and your product development and sales teams are aligned and how you're all coming together as one to support that.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's all part of that return is like, how are you investing in the after the hire and what are you doing in your processes?
Wow, and that's really great because I think about the average person listening, they probably don't look at hiring a sales professional as an investment. But it's when you
Mm.
think about it, it's really I think about like if you're a machine shop and you're selling the
Yep.
stuff that you know have in the back there, you invest in machines. And then
Hmm.
once you have that, you have regular maintenance, you have downtime, you have, you know, you stop to do your measures like you're talking about, all these things. I don't know, to your point, why we don't do that in the sales world. Why don't we think of our sales team as an investment and let's spend some time with them. Let's give them some downtime. Let's measure what their metrics are. I have clients that call me and they're like, "Oh, Dave, I can't meet today." And I'm like, "Why? What's going on?" "Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe what's going on," right? And I'm like, "Well, we got to talk about your sales." "Well, I don't, you know what? Sales are good, man. Sales are good." And it's like, oh, as soon as
Yeah.
I hear those three
Yeah.
nasty sales are good words, I'm like, uh-oh, you know, what does good mean, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh man. So, you know,
You know,
yeah. So how do you measure? Like you talked about that. So I'm just curious if there's some simple metrics that you guys measure.
um, ask me that question a different way as far as the metrics go, because
Or
there
so
are
like a
certainly
sales
lots of metrics to measure.
Yeah, so a sales guy, I'm gonna use guy, sorry for the girls listening. The sales guy jumps on a team, sales girl, whatever, jumps on a
Yeah. Yeah.
team. It's easy on a bigger team to kind of get lost. They give you a big list of
Oh yeah.
people, call on these people, right?
Mhm.
Now, a metric is obviously looking at your sales. That's an easy metric.
Sure.
Another one, if you want, is to look at your margin or whatever. Are there other
Mhm.
things outside of the sales and the margin that you guys measure? You know, I'm just curious if there's behaviors or attitudes or what
Mhm.
other things you guys measure.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So, not just, and this would not go for a very small team, but as you start to get into that, 15 or more salespeople in an organization, we can start to do more, so to
Okay.
speak.
Yeah.
So I believe in building a sales culture, and again, it's much more than just being out in the field calling people 24/7 and knocking on doors, which is great for sales, and you have to be able to do that. But you also
Yep.
have to take time to train, you have to take time to develop, you have to take time to work with marketing. So other things that you can also start to measure outside of your typical KPIs, of course, you have your top line revenue, you have your margin, you have how many calls do you make, how many customer calls, what is your duration to sale and your time, what is the annual recurring revenue? Those are all KPIs that you can easily Google and go find out, right?
Sure.
Great. When you want to really pull back, all right, and start to see about what your team's doing, you want to start to think of it as a leader. How much are you empowering your sales team to have part of the process and what they're doing? Let's give a few examples. I like to maybe have some committees and subcommittees, and let's talk about maybe you're not doing enough work within your CRM, or there's issues with your CRM implementation, and people aren't tracking their revenue funnel the way they should be, or their sales funnels the way they should be, or the whole revenue through the sales. So let's pull two of your salespeople. Let's pull somebody from customer service and let's pull somebody from the financial team to get together
Sure.
maybe for 90 minutes, every other week for a quarter. And let's get together a team and come up with some solutions as to how they can build a better revenue process or sales process for the CRM. And if that's something that we can do, in this specific example, I'm going to want to track that. So that would
Yeah.
actually be part of my quarterly business reviews. How is the CRM team coming together? How are you doing? How are you meeting? And track their progress along that. So it's those different types of things. That's an example. Maybe coming up with new marketing literature for a product launch, working with marketing teams specifically. Perhaps it's the team who's doing your social media, and we want to be able to pinpoint our clients more and call out more positive events for our clients that are out
Sure.
there. Whatever the tasks may be, how have we created an environment where our teams and our salespeople have the time and we have the support to help them build that? Because you want them building their own sales teams and their own processes, right? You want them to be part of it. And then we
Yeah.
measure that. And it's not really a KPI, as you're saying, but you can measure their progress. You can measure their progress as a team lead on that. And then you start to develop out, okay, hey, here are my next leaders within this organization. Or as we continue to expand and hire, who's going to be your next sales trainer? And you start to identify that future leadership and the people who are taking an active part in that, and how successful those tasks or maybe those subtasks are as we go through that process every quarter. And that can be an excellent way to measure out some more of the work that the team's doing. How many key influencers have they brought in? How many, like all that type how many webinars have they done, or how many
Yeah.
podcasts have they done for the
Sure.
organization?
Sure.
Those are all different out of the box things
Gotcha.
that are important
Okay.
to salespeople and their own creative process too.
Wow, that's really cool. And you actually wrote a book, or you wrote
Mhm.
multiple books, and the one is about the fractional CRO, and as
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
and the R stands for revenue. So you're kind of
yeah.
a chief revenue officer. Is your goal in this process, Ted, to eventually hand this off, and then are you the training wheels? And then the training
Yeah.
wheels come off and they fly solo, or is this a longer term thing for people that might be interested in learning more? How do you fit into that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So a lot of times when you have like that C-level executive come into an organization, say a chief revenue officer, it's getting a lot of buzz these days. People are looking at that and they're really trying to evaluate how all the money that's being invested in that C-suite, so to speak.
Yeah,
And there's talk about whether or not do you need a chief marketing officer, and do you need somebody as the head of sales, when you're really trying to follow the entire revenue cycle and bring all those teams together. So in a lot of organizations, as if they restructure, or as the organization grows into these positions of needing to hire some more C-level executives, it's very expensive. It's a big investment. But working in a fractional basis to really develop their strategic plan and do some evaluation, almost as a consulting role. But what I like to say is a consulting role for an organization, but it actually has responsibility for the results. Consultants can be good at coming in and teaching and training and getting people to think about excellent things they need to do or build and develop a plan. But typically, it's on somebody else to execute that plan. So the chief revenue officer, or the fractional director of sales, as it may be, that person's really there, who's accountable for the results and really implementing those, developing, building the strategy. And then the most important part in any organization isn't the actual piece of paper or the strategy, but it's the implementation. So how do you coach people through that process? So that can usually be a 12 to 18-month engagement, which
okay,
may move into a permanent engagement if the company's ready for that.
gotcha.
Or you may hire that off to somebody else as well.
Okay. So
Mhm.
you're involved with the implementation, or you can be, or is it, I mean, sometimes you show
Absolutely
somebody
should.
how to do it and sometimes you do it
Yeah.
for them. So I'm just curious,
Yeah. Yeah.
are you doing both of those right now?
Well, so I can wear two hats for that. If I would say I was a consultant, I'll usually come on board with your organization for 30 to 90 days. We'll develop a strategy, develop an excellent plan, and then the agreement's finished. It's on you to implement and go from there. Of course, there's coaching for how that should work, and
Sure.
recommendations, but it really is a thank you, I'll be here if you need me again type of thing, and you part ways. As opposed to that fractional work, which would be and I would build that out for you this first 90 days. And then as a fractional CRO, we would be there for the implementation process of that plan and see it through fruition, help make adjustments as you need to, like along the way, conduct those monthly and quarterly reviews, and really be in charge of that entire strategy to make sure that we're hitting all of our top line improvement priorities and things along those
Yeah.
lines. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
for everyone listening, I heard Ted say for every dollar you give Ted, he gives you $3 back. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that machine exists in this world, but if it did, I sure would want that, right? Just put a dollar in and three come
Printing
out.
money.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a
printing
time machine.
printing
You put
money.
a piece of plastic in and out comes money, but the problem is it's your money.
Yeah.
This, he's
Yeah.
actually taking client money and giving it to you. So I really enjoy that and appreciate that. One last question, I'm going to let you go. What would your tip of the day
Yeah.
be, Ted, for anybody listening? Maybe it's something that we covered. Maybe it's just something that's burning on your heart that we haven't talked about yet. Is there what's your tip of the day for people listening?
Dave, people like you and I are out there doing this great work for great organizations every single day. If I were an organization who's listening or has come across yourself or somebody like me as well, take the call. Take 30 minutes to 45 minutes to learn about what somebody else could be doing for you. Help them explore some answers to questions that you didn't even know you were supposed to ask,
Yeah,
and it's going to be worth your time. Whether or not you move forward with an engagement at that time, it doesn't matter. But take the call, be out there, listen to what that person can help provide for you, see if there's a good relationship or a rapport there, and if they would be a good fit to work with. And it's 30 to 45 minutes, and if you can't find a time for that, that's the reason you need to hire. I mean it. I mean,
no kidding,
honestly.
right?
So
Yeah,
the time is there. The time is
yeah,
there. And the better processes you have, the better systems that you have, the more time is available for you to build solid operations and achieve operation and sales excellence. And you
yeah.
have to invest that time to make that work. And again, you have to be able to just take the call and find out.
Yeah. It's a bummer when people change a tire and then when they could just fill it with air, right? I mean,
Yeah.
rather than just just stop. Just stop, like Ted said, stop for a minute. And as we land today, I just want to go back to the question that we started with is, how often do you hit your revenue targets? If you're consistently not hitting them,
Mhm.
it's easy to blame the company, it's easy to blame the competitor, the customer, the government, the weather. I mean, we can come up with a ton of
Sure.
things to blame, right?
Yeah.
Super easy, right? Great. Now what? Okay. All we have is still unmet revenue goals. So I'm
Mhm.
learning in my career to take the responsibility for this myself rather than blame other people, look at it and go, my gosh, this is on me. So again, for
Yes.
people listening, if you're not hitting your revenue goals, this is why Ted's here. And so he just said, invest 30 minutes. If you can't invest 30 minutes, I get it, but then don't get mad at Ted. Don't get mad at me because we're giving you some good information on how to make sure that you hit those goals. So if somebody wants to learn more about you, Ted, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Absolutely. They can find me on LinkedIn, Ted Fluck on LinkedIn for sure. And my website, dynamicsalesteams.com are the easiest two ways to get a hold of me at any time. And I'm active and available all the time and constantly writing new books and new blogs. And so whatever it may be, for any type of sales organization or any type of revenue challenge that people have out there. I mean, again, I just continue to implore people, just take the call, find out what you don't know, and listen to people like Dave and myself, and we're gonna give you enough to make it worth your time for sure in that moment. And I guarantee if in an engagement out there that it'll definitely be worth your time to help grow your teams.
That's so cool. And to the listener, as we close today, rather than just jump into your next activity or rather than jump to your next podcast, really sit with this, sit and think about what's one thing that I learned from Ted today that I could do. Maybe it's to call him, maybe it's to talk about AI in your resume. That was cool. Maybe you got to do a deconstruct. There's so many different things. Maybe you have to look at investing more in your sales team. Whatever it is, don't feel like you have to do it alone. That's why there's Ted's here. That's why people like I'm here just to be able to come alongside you and help you with whatever you have going on. So don't feel like you have to do it alone. And again, thank you so much, Ted, for your service in the Army. Thank you for your service to the salespeople. We love having people pay attention to revenue because,
Yeah.
again, without you, we don't have the marketing team. We don't have the operational team. We don't have customers. We got nothing without sales. So hopefully, if you're listening, your attitude towards sales at least got challenged a little bit today. And feel free to, again, reach out to Ted. And thank you so much, Ted, for hanging out with us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a good time.